superstars. Welcome back to another episode of Word Up with Danny Katz. If you are watching this with your eyes, I have no idea why it looks like my camera is smeared in custard. If you're listening to it, don't worry about it. Everything is fine. Today I am joined by Gina Devani. Gina is a psychedelic assisted guide. I'm not sure if how the word therapist is being officially defined in this context, so I'm going to work with psychedelic assisted guide. And I had Gina on the show to talk about her path, her job, what it's like to work with people one-on-one with psychedelics, some of the pitfalls, the larger cultural landscape, all the juicy things. Before we dive in, I'm reminding you to click that subscribe button and thanking you for doing that. I'm also reminding and thanking you to like, to share, to comment. Your comments go a long way in convincing the algorithm to give me more exposure. I don't know, more algorithm points. I don't really know how that game works. I just know that when you like and comment, it helps me. I'm also recommending that you sign up for my newsletter at dannykatz.com. I've heard whispered occurrences of people being unsubscribed from me or my content being suppressed. So the best way that you can stay abreast of my every next offering is to subscribe to my newsletter. As always, this episode is divided in two. The first half is free on all the podcast platforms as well as on Locals and YouTube. The second half is available for paid supporters on both my Locals and Patreon communities, let's just combine them. So those are dannykatz.locals.com, patreon.com/dannykatz, where for as little as $5 a month, you get access to all of my second half content, you get bonus content, you get advance notice and discounts on webinars, workshops, new books, new offerings, chances to drop in with me and the tribe, chances to drop in with me one-on-one. It's really a delightful situation that you totally want to get in on. Links are also included in the show notes below. That does it for housekeeping. Buckle up and prepare to enjoy my rollicking conversation with Gina Devani. All right, well, we can just jump right in. Gina, how are you?
I'm doing really well.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's so nice to talk to someone in the same geography as I am. Like, we have the same light, we have the same weather. It's rare that I talk to other people in Santa Fe, so I'm glad to be here with you, a fellow local.
Yay.
Yay!
Yeah, and I'm celebrating this warm weather, so.
So nice. Yeah. So Gina, I know you do a bunch of things, and what inspired me most to have you on is your work with psychedelics.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to know like how you work with psychedelics and how you got into working with psychedelics.
Sure. I'm trying to think where to start. How I work with psychedelics is in a therapeutic capacity. So I facilitate full day sessions and also integration and preparation sessions with people and retreats and for small groups and also for couples. So that is sort of in a nutshell the work that I'm doing. And then how I got into it is kind of funny because I wasn't one of those people who worked with psychedelics in my younger years, like maybe here or there in a social capacity, but it just wasn't really my thing and never really spoke to me, honestly. And then later in life, I had a concussion and I was having a hard time healing from the concussive syndrome, post-concussive syndrome, and symptoms just lingered on for like a year and a half. And I just had this intuition one day that LSD would be the answer.
Well, slow down.
Yeah.
Where did that Like, where did that come from? Had you heard of other people dealing with post-concussive injuries working with LSD?
Nope. It came out of nowhere. I don't
And
know where.
had you had a relationship with LSD at that point?
Zero.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So previously I had taken really not big doses of mushrooms a couple times and definitely no LSD. So yeah, so I don't know where it came from. It was like a little message like entered one ear and was like, look into this. So I started researching it, and this was several years ago. So at the time, there wasn't any information, there was no data yet. Now, all the data is coming out about head injuries and how helpful psychedelics can be. So anyway, I talked to a couple friends who were more knowledgeable, and I found a guide to work with because I was not going in there by myself. And I did, and all the symptoms were gone that day. So
Okay, wait. So, did you like did you take more than an average dose of
nope.
LSD? And what did the guide do with you during that journey?
For the most part, she just played music and sat with me. She did a couple of guided meditations, but I was in so deep that I was like, I'm doing my work in here and I don't really need that right now. So I just kind of was on my own program. But yeah, so I mean, really, what she did for me was she made it safe for me to go in there and do all that. And
Mhm.
that is the bottom line of why to work with a guide in the first place, is because our nervous system and our parts, uh, our psychology doesn't feel safe when we're vulnerable and not able to be alert, right? There's some sort of primal mechanism that gets activated. So we can't totally fully relax and go all the way into the experience like we can if someone that we trust, number one, is holding space for us in a way that is skilled and yeah, just really trustworthy and knowledgeable. So it's funny about I say like skilled and knowledgeable because they're almost subtle things. You don't necessarily know what the guide is doing that is helpful, but it's more what they're not doing often.
Mhm.
So, because a lot of people can be really disruptive. I had one guide who sat for me one time, was a complete disaster because she didn't stop talking and she didn't stop touching me. and like a lovely human who I enjoy. However, I would never recommend that person to anyone, and I would never sit with that person again because it was absurd. You need to be able to feel safe and secure inside of your psyche in order to do the work that you came there to do.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
And so during that LSD trip, was the LSD like showing you your brain injury? Was it, was it obvious what was happening in terms of the
Nope.
healing?
Didn't even talk about it. Like the subject never even came up in the context of my journey. Um, so uh so it wasn't like I went directly to the problem and was like, hey, let's solve this problem, right? It was more that LSD opens up every part of your brain, and so that there's communication happening between areas of the brain that would never normally talk to each other. And so it builds all these new pathways, and that was what I needed. I needed my pathways back, like because I was starting to have memory loss and just not able to sort of put two and two together in life, so to speak. Really, a lot of disruptive thought patterns and depression was seeping in, and all things that are really normal for somebody with a traumatic brain injury. So the LSD just I think this is what happened because we couldn't open up my brain and look at it and see what was happening at the time. There was no fMRI that was working on me. So and that for anybody who doesn't know, functional MRI machine. So um, I just trust that that's what was happening because it seems like that was happening. Definitely, I felt like, and even still today when I work with LSD, I notice like every part of my brain is online and awake and activated. And it's really a way to expand one's own capacity. So, and LSD is a different drug than mushrooms by far in terms of like what it can do for people, what definitely what it does for me and what I notice happens with other individuals and in my conversations with others too. So LSD is more of this like expansion, uh, going into pure consciousness, really even in like, so, and when I talk about doing psychedelics in a therapeutic capacity, I am also talking about doing it like with eye mask on, eyes closed. You're in there deep, not an eyes open experience out in nature. This is a contained experience. LSD behaves completely differently if you have eyes open and you're out in the world completely. So, so any reference that I make to the work with psychedelics is going to be in this kind of capacity where eyes are closed. Usually there's an eye mask, not always, but definitely eyes are closed and for the better part of the session. And usually music is on. Sometimes music's not supportive, but usually it is.
Mhm. And what medicines are you working with, and how are you determining what medicine is appropriate for each person or each situation?
Yeah, everybody's different. I definitely have a whole intake that I have people walk through that's very detailed, talks about that what's going on in their life, what's gone on in their like history of their life, um, and what kind of experience they have with any kind of psychedelic medicines in the past. And what were the dosages if they know them. A lot of times people are like, I don't know, I just took a handful of mushrooms, I have no idea. Or yeah, somebody just gave me an LSD tab and I don't know how many micrograms that was. So I hear that one a lot. So we just talk a lot and use intuition as well as to like where to start with somebody. So I work with mushrooms, I work with LSD, I work with MDMA. And those three things are not given together. Uh, MDMA could be given with mushrooms, it could be given with LSD, and the usefulness, and it could also be given by itself. So for people with more PTSD or anxiety, MDMA is wonderful medicine because it basically shuts off the amygdala or the fear center of the brain. And so that you don't have fear coming up in an experience, because there can be anxiety with both of the other options. So MDMA could happen by itself, or it could be paired with mushrooms. It could be paired with LSD, and it's always given beforehand. So those are sort of the equations, and it's different dosing for everybody based on their history and their what what is the right dose for them. But with most people, I don't start in high dosing. Occasionally, it's right for some people.
I'm honored to be one of those exceptions. Um, so I mean, I realize it's different for most, for everyone individually, but you mentioned MDMA is really good for trauma. Like, are there kind of like basic situations that you generally rely on psilocybin, or that you generally will recommend LSD? Like, what are kind of the basic parameters?
I will recommend LSD for somebody who is really not looking to do deep, like soul retrieval work. Someone who's more looking to have a spiritual experience,
Mhm.
that wants to know what it feels like to swim in the sea of pure consciousness.
Mhm.
That is the right direction to go for someone who, yeah, is maybe doing other. I have another client who I am working with who is like, I'm doing all this other stuff to look at the shadow and all this, and I just kind of don't want to mess with that, but I really want to have this spiritual experience, because I don't get those in my meditation. Some people do, and I don't know if it's 50-50 or what, but a lot of people don't have that experience because they're, for whatever reason, they're too grounded, or it's just not sort of how their psyche rolls. And so this person is one of those where it's like, I want to have that experience, and but I don't want to mess with like all this other stuff that I'm doing. So I don't want to do mushrooms, because mushrooms are really better for somebody who is working to unearth things inside of them that they otherwise cannot find or see or understand in a way that they can, when they go into the mind expansion with mushrooms.
Mhm.
It works really differently, and there can be more anxiety with mushrooms than what any of these other ones that I'm mentioning today. So that's another reason to pair MDMA with the mushrooms in particular.
Oh, that's interesting. So the MDMA cuts the anxiety.
Yeah, because you go in with the fear part of your brain off.
Mhm.
That's off, and then period of time into the journey, then you take the mushrooms,
Mhm.
the LSD. So yeah, that is kind of a common approach for a lot of guides.
Mhm.
Some people will only strictly work with MDMA, or some people will only strictly work with mushrooms, and those are good options as well. So, and to mix things like this, absolutely, I would only suggest doing that with a skilled guide,
Mhm.
someone who is holding you in the experience, and someone who can advise you about what is the right. And I won't talk about dosages here, because it's just too um it's too risky to put that information out there and someone grabs it in the wrong way. So it's, I notice, like, as I'm even saying these things, I'm like, well, let's see, actually, how is this to say this out loud?
Yeah.
And so I'll put out there a disclaimer of, I do not recommend doing this by yourself. I do not. Never. So, if you are a guide and you know what you're doing, okay. But if you're not, no. So it's really important to be safe with these things, and to, I don't mean to be cavalier, I more mean to be informational. So hopefully it's coming across that way.
It is. And worry not, my audience is a very self-responsible tribe of people who generally have a lot of experience with psychedelics. So, this is just informational. We're not making any recommendations. So I know in my experience, like when I'm working with, say, psilocybin, like I'm connecting with the spirit of the mushroom and I'm in, deep prayer, communion with that. How does that translate with something like LSD or MDMA that's made in a lab, that's a synthetic? Like, is there a spirit there that is an overarching intelligence?
Well, I would agree that there definitely is with mushrooms, and you can commune with them. In my experience, it's like a mother energy, that may not be what other people experience, but it's what comes through for me. And with LSD, let's see, is there? a spirit intelligence. I can't say that I've ever had that experience that the medicine itself is a spirit intelligence. I'm not saying that that's not true. Just because something was made in the lab, I don't believe that means it's not possible. So, but what I do notice is that it opens one up so that you have a direct line to spirit in general, right? So, it takes any middle being out of the way, and then you just go direct. So, MDMA, I just, if you're working with MDMA by itself, I can't say there's necessarily a spiritual experience. It
Mhm.
can be for some people, and might be more in the way that I described the LSD.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
see that. Just like removing the barriers that keep us from certain parts of ourselves or merging with others.
Mhm.
How did you move from, okay, so you had your LSD experience. You had, was it like when you came down, did you know your brain was healed, or was it over the next few days that you saw symptoms disappear?
Yeah, it was definitely over the next few days and then weeks, and then just kind of, is it going to come back? And nothing ever came back. So I felt super clear immediately afterward, and that clarity, that kind of clarity, really stayed with me for months.
Hmm.
I meditate. I always advise people to meditate on their experience and conjuring up as much of the detail and sensations as they can from the experience, to work with it, in the meditation for, gosh, I mean, like as many months as possible as a daily meditation. How long can you hold on to any memory of that? Because it does help to solidify the pathways in the brain that
Mm,
are opened up in the experience.
yeah. And so, how did you move from having that healing experience with LSD to then being a practitioner of psychedelic therapy?
Yeah. So initially, and I had done a lot of like coaching training, life coach, health coach, all this kind of stuff, a decade before. And I actually wasn't actively doing that work, mostly because I realized that I needed to kind of go back inside and do more work on myself. And so I had spent many years, just delving into my own stuff because I didn't really feel like I could put my hand out to help somebody else. After I got deeper into it, I'm like, I don't think I'm helping. You know, so I pulled back, and I didn't even have any intention of ever doing healing work again. But this definitely planted a seed for something. And I looked at my guide and I thought, wow, it's really intimidating to think about like how much journeying she has done, to get to the place of being able to help someone else.
Mhm.
And so initially that was like, yeah, this is really inspiring. And I can see how profound this work is. And I guess I'll leave it to the experts. I was just too intimidated in that moment. And so then I just kept doing my life. I did more journeys, with guides, and one with a friend who was able to sit for me. And something just opened up where I was like, clear. I'm like, I need to be doing this work. It's too useful, it's too profoundly helpful, it's too transformational, and I've always been called into supporting others in transformation. So so it was sort of like, okay, I guess I have to do that. And I sought out training, a lot of different kinds of training, definitely training that was specific to being a psychedelic guide, Hakomi, which is somatic psychotherapy technique, internal family systems, which again, back into psychology. And I just kept going. I also had to do, as one of my mentors says, a lot of time on the mat. So it was true, what that kind of assumption that I made with my first guide, like, she's must have taken a lot of psychedelics, to get here. And so that is true. I think that's one of the most important things, although it's not a standalone. I wouldn't necessarily just trust someone who's had a lot of experience with psychedelics, because I've also known people who are doing that, who sort of fancy themselves as a guide or facilitator because they've had so much, and I can understand like how someone would believe they were equipped. But it was really, really good for me to be in the guide training and in the psychotherapy trainings, because I deepened my understanding of what's going on in the psyche. I deepened my understanding of the things that can go wrong in this work. I deepened my understanding of the kind of people for whom this is not the right thing. And so I have a lot more breadth and depth to my awareness in order to be in integrity doing this work, which is super important to me.
Yeah, me too. Who is this work not right for, and what are some of the things that go wrong?
Yeah. Anybody with a history of psychosis, for sure. They're doing research about bipolar, but at this point, I don't think they have enough information. I would not suggest it for anybody with bipolar.
How do you define bipolar?
You have to go to the DSM and look at that, because I'm not a person who can specifically define that.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't even know if it's in the DSM, honestly. So it's more personality types, maybe. But or schizophrenia wouldn't, although it's really interesting because you get into this with, or you can with mushrooms in particular, you can kind of get into this deep understanding of all the parts that are living inside of us, which we all have. And even just hearing about it, it starts to sound a little bit like dissociative identity disorder, but it's different. The people with DID have a lot more strongholds, protectors, protecting the original one, and also in non-trusting. And so I don't want to get too much into that detail because it's not my expertise. So I'll kind of like leave it there. And the other thing I always say to people is do your own research. Don't trust anybody. Like, don't trust me. Don't trust anybody to tell you whether psychedelics is right for you or not. I actually never recommend it to anybody at all. So I'm not recommending it to anybody who's listening. People who know that it's right for them feel called to it and they seek it out. And that is the way it needs to be. Would never, ever recommend it to anybody. Do research. There's so much information. There are so many scientific studies that you can find online. You can just read a lot of different websites that are really good at providing precise information about the medicines and about the usefulness. Do your own research. I had one client that I work with who researched for at least a year before ever taking anything. But He felt called to it, but he also just wasn't sure whether it was going to be right for him. So he did research for a long time, and then he started with microdosing, and then eventually he worked up into full sessions. So that is what I recommend to everybody. Don't let anybody tell you it's right for you. Period. You got to find out for yourself. If you're curious, just start digging in. There's so much information out there now. And that is really the right way to approach it.
I always tell people, because I've been, obviously walking a psychedelic path for a long time, but I also don't ever recommend psychedelics to anyone. And when people mention to me that they're curious about psychedelics, I'm like, great, set the intention and wait for them to find you. That's always been, and it's not my business. I'm not a psychedelic facilitator, but I've just had enough people ask me that I don't see there to be value in chasing after these experiences, because they can be colored in so many other things like social currency or like cool points or even a degree of spiritual bypassing, because it's, way cooler to drink ayahuasca than like be with our dissociated parts.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's true. I think they do find you if you set the intention. I have seen that happen for basically everybody who's come to me. And the way it happened for me too. Like I was curious about LSD for years and years, and it just never lined up. There were a few times where, I was going to maybe do it with this friend or with that friend, and whatever reason, it didn't line up. And then when it was time, it worked out. I was clear that I was a yes. And then immediately I had a friend who had just worked with a guide who was wonderful. And that person's actually now my mentor. So it just completely unfolded easily. And I think that is a really good way to go. Yeah.
It's always worked for me. Any big journey that I've done, it's because I've been invited. The medicine has made it super clear. There's so many synchronicities, so I always say I never make the decision from my own ego or intellect. I'm only responding to invitations and calls that come to me from the medicine, and that's worked well for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good way to go. And I think people know when they're called.
Yeah. Do you see a through line? Like, because I hear people talk about journeys and fear and anxiety, and I really don't even know what that's like, but I respect that other people have those experiences. And I just, from my vantage point, it seems like there's some people who are kind of wired or part of the fractal family that's part of the psychedelic path. And maybe it comes easier for us, or we're more comfortable in those realms. But I'm wondering if you notice any through lines between people who seem to be more aligned with psychedelics and people for whom they're not going to be part of their earth walk.
Well, a number of things come up for me with that comment and question. They were very easy for me initially. Meditation also for many years, 15 years at least, before even going into this kind of work, I would have these almost psychedelic experiences in meditation. And so going into the LSD was like just that whole same thing, but on steroids or whatever. So, and more like somatic, like sensations, rather than all kind of in the mind. So I'm pausing for a moment to just kind of collect my thoughts about like how to go about explaining this, because it's actually super interesting. So yeah, the first handful of journeys I had, easy peasy. Even I worked with mostly LSD initially, just because I enjoyed the experience so much. I'm also a painter, and so it's a great boon to creativity. And I think it's because it just opens up the brain so much. So and then I worked with mushrooms, first journey. Easy, really easy. And then what I noticed was something started to shift. Um, I really dove into the mushrooms because that was my focus for my practice. Because most people come A, wanting to work with mushrooms, and B, being ready to do that kind of work. I didn't realize, it's sort of like you don't know what you don't know. I didn't realize until I really got into it that even though I had been doing all this personal work for decades and a lot of meditation and other kinds of spiritual practices, I actually wasn't getting anywhere with any of those. And I think it's pretty common. So I didn't know that I wasn't getting anywhere until I started working with mushrooms. And then what I would say is, like, over time, and I've seen this with other people and not with everybody, is that you peel away layer after layer after layer, and these can be like the finest, thinnest layer of psychological material. We do it with meditation. We do it in our lives, out in nature. Just living life can do that to a certain degree. But what I notice for myself and for other people starting to work more deeply with mushrooms, you peel away bigger layers. You start getting into a lot more shadow material. And when I say shadow material, it doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong. It means it's stuff we can't see normally. It's in there, but we don't even realize it's in there. Sometimes we have an inkling that something's in there, but honestly, we have no idea the scope of it until we really start looking at it. I was also studying quite a lot of internal family systems for many years, for the better part of 10 years. And so that has come in handy for me in my own journeys for myself and also as I work with clients. So without getting completely into like the infrastructure of what internal family systems is, some people who are listening are going to know what it is, and let's just go with that. But the bottom line essentially is that we all have parts living inside of ourselves. We have our like self, which is the core of who we are, and then we have a lot of different kind of protectors, and then we also have really young parts. We could be infants to 7, 8 years old that got really scared from something that happened early in life, and they kind of tucked away. In internal family systems, they call that an exile. And then all the protectors, a different kind of protectors, but all the protectors are keeping that little one safe. So when you start peeling away layers and you get close to the little one, the protectors say, oh, fuck no. My job is to die protecting that one, right? Like they are that serious about their job. And so they will do a lot of things to keep you from finding that little one. Protectors in a psychedelic journey can look like scary monsters, and they can look like angelic light beings. So one way or another, they're going to try to convince you to not go here. And that shows up a lot of really extraordinarily creative ways. So, I mean, it's really amazing to see like the creative genius that the parts that they are, the things that they come up with to sideswipe you.
Can you give us an example of like some of the more creative methods you've seen them employ?
I have a lot of these protectors. So I've been getting to know them really, really well over the years. And I can talk about my own stories really easily, and with integrity. And so I had trying to pick the story, which one? So try to find one that's not too long. I had a recent experience that what it ended up being like a newborn part, like something that happened to me when I was a newborn, and then that newborn part of me exiled away, and then all of these protectors have been keeping that little one safe for my whole life. And so it means that we still have these fears living inside of us, and they get triggered when we get triggered in life. So if we have outbursts or rage, or even things like fawning and being and turning inward, are all activities of this whole protector system. So they will influence our behavior in a way to keep us out of danger. I mean, it doesn't really work, which is a sad thing. So it's usually running amok in our lives because it actually makes bigger problems, because we're adults now. We're not two. So if you have a 2-year-old protector creating 2-year-old strategies to keep you safe, it's going to be super fucked up. So okay, so I had this infant part, and I knew there was something going on because like in my everyday life, because I had a scary incident happen, and it started to trigger some panic attacks because to my understanding, it sort of frazzled the whole system, and then the young one wasn't being protected in the way that it normally would be. And so I had a few panic attacks, and I'm like, okay, this is the way that I roll, and I do not recommend this to other people, but I have enough experience that I can see when there's an exile that needs to be found. So it's sort of like if you knew that a kid had fallen down a well, would you just leave them there and wait for them to figure it out and get themselves out? Probably not. It's really the same thing with our parts. So for me, in my practices, when I get clues that there's an exile, I literally mount an expedition with mushrooms, and a person I trust to sit for me so that I can get in there really deep, and find the exile and bring it home. And so I did this pretty recently, actually. I've done it many times, but I'll talk about a recent experience. So it was really difficult to get to, and I don't, when before you get in there and find the part, you don't know what you're looking for. When protectors are really fierce, it's a good clue that there is a very, very young part or an infant, because they get more and more creative and fierce about keeping you.
And how do you know? Like, how does a fierce protector express or manifest so that we could recognize it?
Yeah. So they could express, like I described before, scary monsters could show up in your inner vision. Just an ominous feeling, a scary, ominous feeling, because not everybody has visuals. So I don't want it to be like, oh, it's always like this, because everybody's different. So often people have visuals, but not always. So it could be a sensation, like, it's like a dark stairway into a basement that I don't want to go down, or the mind will create scenarios that for you because they know how to scare you. Your parts know how to scare you. My parts know how to scare me. So it's going to be different for everybody. So they will create a whole scenario to keep you from going down that stairway. And that, yeah, it could just be a sensation. It could be look like demons or snakes or any number of things. Like there's no possible way to even like run the gamut of all the possibilities. But I'm
curious because you said they can also present as angelic. So what I'm wondering is like, how do you know that some angel telling you everything you want to hear is full of shit? And then how do you maneuver around said protector to get to what you really want to deal with, which is probably going to be less pleasant?
Well, it's a tricky thing because so this is going into legitimate spiritual bypassing. And when I use the term spiritual bypassing, I don't mean it as like a shamey blamey thing. It is something that happens to all of us, and it is our parts keeping us safe. Sometimes it's a really great choice. So if you feel like there's something like if you get suspicious of the angelic being or you get suspicious of the scary monster, there's probably a way for you to move beyond it. Now, if that's a full stop for you, then that's great. That's as far as you're going to go. And that's a good choice. And for years, I had no idea that angelic light being protectors were keeping me from seeing all the stuff that's inside of me. I had no idea. But that was my experience in meditation for years and years and years, just like straight into the light. And I didn't even know that it was a bypass until I was ready to actually look at that stuff, because I guarantee you that if I was having the experiences that I have today, back then, I wouldn't have been prepared to deal with it. So yeah, I ended up finding this infant part, but it was like I had to go through a gauntlet of both monsters and light beings, maybe like 15 times getting in there, and I would have to remember my intention. And I would have to sort of put my own therapist hat back on and go, I came here to find the exile. I came here to find the exile. I came here to find that little one, whoever it is. And then I could keep going, because they are very convincing, these protectors. They're very convincing. And I don't get scared off by the monsters, but I can get swept into like delight with the light being ones, because it's nice. It's nice. It's like, oh, they just want to tell you that everything is okay. Oh, this is why it's okay, and everything is fine, and this is the way it needs to, blah blah blah. And they nearly tricked me a couple of times, but I'm like, no, I know there's more. I came in here for a reason. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky inner train. And most people do not do what I do. Most people do not mount an expedition to go look for an exile and then, navigate the gauntlet of protectors in one session. Right. For most people, it's going to be many sessions, because you do get stopped, or you only get this far. And that's great. That's really great. But like, this is my work. This is my life's work. And so it is part of my life's work to be an expert at dealing with my own stuff. So, and it helps me to help other people. And I educate people to a certain degree before they go in. And if they get stuck, I help them through that protector, if that's what needs to happen. Some people get so stuck in anxiety that that's as far as they're going to go today. And that's where MDMA comes in, because if you can turn that off, then you can, then they're, the protectors just aren't as, well, they just don't show up in the same way. They
Mhm.
don't show up in the same way. So it's a little easier. And I have a little bit like, I haven't really decided, actually, I would have to say. I haven't decided what's better, because protectors in the internal family systems model, the whole point is to get their permission to keep going.
Mhm.
So in a way, I like just going straight in with mushrooms, because it forces you to ask for permission all along the way. It forces you to gain a sense of understanding, deeper understanding about what's really living inside of you. It doesn't put a soft blanket on it, you know, which MDMA will do. It it's harder, and I do sometimes think that it's more useful in the bigger picture, because it's just more honest. Um, and you do build that rapport with the protectors along the way, asking for their permission, acknowledging that they are there doing a job, that they've been doing a good job, and that, you know, something else is calling you forward, and can you please pass?